Hi, I'm Jason Pidcock with Jason Pidcock Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar on the 8 primary feelings as presented by Dr. Chip Dodd in his book, The Voice of the Heart. And the reason I'm excited to talk about this topic is because it can bring a lot of structure and clarity to an otherwise very chaotic subject around feelings. A lot of us were taught to ignore our feelings. We were taught to see them as a danger. We have our own experiences of them kind of leading us into places that we have deep regrets about. And yet we come into recovery, into coaching, and we're told to feel them and to trust them. And that can be very confusing, especially if we're not even sure what a feeling actually is, like what defines one, and what a feeling's not. So we're going to tackle all of that in the webinar today. And if you were one of the guys who attended this already, or you're just seeing it for the first time, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments below once you're finished. And with that, we'll jump right into it. All right, so tonight we are going to be talking about the 8 primary. Well, let's go here. 8 feelings and finding our way home. And just for starting out here, and this is going to be very relevant for what I just shared and where I'm needing to be here. I want to get a little bit of a feeling here at the beginning of our session around this word home. And I'm of course aware that a lot of us might be, might have some baggage, some traumas, some unpleasant memories of home. But I want to think about it in a moment here where we set some of that stuff aside and we think of like the the redeemed version of home, if you will, the the version of home that calls to our hearts, that feeling of that brings a sense of calmness and belonging. Um, I was thinking of the Lord of the Rings, and the Shire, and just kind of that peaceful environment, or whatever version of that you may have. I just kind of wanted to like take a moment and just sort of bring that in, and familiarize our body and our nervous system right at the beginning here with that sensation, what that is, for each of us. And the reason I just want to call that into our bodies and into our consciousness is because what we're going to be sharing here tonight is these 8 feelings we're going to be talking about and how they bring us internally to that place of home. And I just have a quick little definition here. Home is the place where you belong without question, and you matter without condition. It is the place where you are fully known and fully free to explore your most whole desires, longings, and hopes. And so I just want to, again, just kind of like let that feeling, let that picture kind of wash over you, and keep that in mind as we go throughout the evening here, discussing these 8 feelings. And ask yourself okay, just throughout the process, and hopefully it will be obvious through the instruction, but by the end, how these things bring us home. But it is the ultimate purpose of them. And I just want to start out too by saying, I invite our inner critics and cynics, um, like really feelings lead me to that place. We've had a lot of chaos, most of us, around feelings. I just wrote a couple bullet points here. Our parents, and this might not apply to everybody, but a lot of us will identify, I think, with at least one, if not all 3 of these. Parents teaching us from a very young age that our feelings are irrelevant. When you had feelings as a kid, when I had feelings as a kid, they didn't really seem to matter very much. And I had, pastors or teachers, spiritual instructors, telling us that our feelings are dangerous and we shouldn't trust them. And then maybe throughout your life, you've had your own experiences with feelings, feeling torturous or being dangerous. You say, I followed up on that feeling, and that was a terrible idea. And so that's a lot of for a lot of us, this is kind of the road that we're coming into this conversation on around feelings. And yet we find ourselves in therapy and coaching and where we're talking about the value of feelings and how, in a lot of cases, especially where there's been abuse and that kind of thing, and histories of grooming and we're taught to trust our guts and follow our feelings, and you can't watch a Disney movie without getting away from that message. And it can just be very, very confusing. And I know that a lot of you, when I was sending out the invites and things like that, voiced your own confusion around the value of these, the points of these, and our experiences versus what we've been formally taught, either by past people who are harming us in that, or even people that we now trust, like a therapist or a coach. So my goal is to just share with you guys a tool and a model that I've been given early on. I was introduced to this at the very beginning of my recovery almost a decade ago, and it's been the foundation for me. I get a lot of feedback around um, my self-awareness and my ability to articulate feelings. And for me, this is the model that is ingrained into my system, and it's what gives me so much clarity and allows me to understand what I'm feeling. So I'm really excited to share this with you guys because it's been so personally meaningful in my life. So these feelings, 8 primary feelings I have here on this slide, I want you to think about these 8 feelings like the primary colors. So, we got this guy right here. He looks at this circle and he's like, oh, that's purple, right? And he's right about that. He's absolutely right. And anybody over the age of 3 could probably nail this. Just like all of us could label simple feelings. I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling hurt, I'm feeling lonely, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling shame, I'm feeling glad. Um, and so these 8 feelings are basically the primary feelings that we're going to go through. But you can imagine somebody who not only just, well, in this case, in this analogy, sees the colors of purple, um, but somebody who really understands this color at a much, much deeper level than, say, a 3-year-old who could easily identify it would be this guy right here. This guy doesn't see purple. He sees a mix of about 30% blue, 40% red, and 30% white. And you can imagine from an artist standpoint, or maybe even from, let's say you wanted to become an artist yourself, and you're trying to figure out, who you're going to follow. Which of these 2 guys would you look at as probably somebody that could teach you a little more and take you a little further? Obviously it's going to be this guy on the right here. Just by looking at this very simple picture, you can see that, the one guy sees feeling or sees colors, and this other guy actually really truly understands the colors. And much the same way an artist can do this with a color palette, my goal by the end of the tonight is that you guys can do something very similar to this using feelings. And so just like there's 3 primary colors in the art world, there might be 8 primary feelings in the mental health field. And I know this is a little bit of a change up from probably like a tool. A lot of you are familiar with the feelings wheel, which is like 4,000 different feelings on there. And this doesn't have to compete with that at all. They can both be very useful tools. Sometimes the feelings wheel and the amount that it provides can be really helpful. And for me, I found it might just because this is the way I was taught. I found that being able to boil it down to 8 primary ones and having a much smaller list actually allows me to be like extremely precise. And it really forces me to identify very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Um, just be able to articulate very precisely what feeling I'm feeling, because a lot of times we'll use words that there's actually like feelings underneath those words, but we kind of stay up there Whereas these 8 feelings will draw you down further to the deeper levels, if that makes sense, because they are the primary feelings. So that's kind of just a brief, like, bird's eye view of what this is about and where this is going, and the types of things we're going to be looking at. So to do this, and it might feel a little bit like we're kind of jumping onto a moving train here at the beginning. If it is, that's okay. I would ask that you try to just stay like in it moment by moment. And by the end, I want all of these dots to connect. And my goal is for this to be like really super, just practical and very clear. Even if there's points along the ways where it feels like we're kind of, like I said, jumping in where, onto a moving train, because, these things, to really like set this up properly and teach this from kind of a ground zero the way that I'd really like to, we'd need literally an entire weekend to do it. And we're trying to boil this down into about an hour or so. So that said, the meaning of this particular slide, 8 primary feelings and 8 gifts. So we're going to, again, jump right into this where we'll go one by one through the 8 feelings. And along with that feeling, we're just going to go ahead and jump into a gift that comes with that feeling. And again, I invite your guys's cynics to the table here tonight and to say, man, I've felt this feeling my whole life and I don't identify with that gift. Like what? Like what, how can you say that these gifts come from these feelings? I don't experience them. And I want to talk about that tonight too. And there's a reason why that may be. So if you're feeling that objection or that confusion as we go here, just hang on to it. And I promise by the end, we'll talk through that. So just jumping right off here with the very first one. One of the 8 primary feelings is hurt. And the gift of hurt, of feeling hurt, is repair. So you could think of this in a very almost biological sense. If you have received some kind of injury, you feel the first thing that your body becomes aware there's an injury is it feels pain, it feels hurt. And what that does is the gift of that pain, the gift of feeling pain, is that you're given attention to the area that has been injured and harmed. And so what happens is a lot of times in the medical field, and I think we probably have some doctors here tonight with us, I'm sure they could attest to this, is you have a patient come in who has not been paying attention to their pain. And what started off as something very small and something very insignificant that could have been treated quite easily has now blown up into something far more invasive and harmful and damaging to their body. And, the doctor, the nurse, whatever, of course, the obvious question in the room is like, why in the world did you not attend to this sooner? So in a very, literal sense, physically, you guys can understand this concept of how the gift of the pain in our bodies leads us to getting the attention and care we need, to repairing the harm that's been done. It's the same thing in relationships. So the first primary feeling is hurt. And if you are willing to feel and experience hurt in your relationships, and I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean by that if you're willing to feel it. We'll get into that a little bit later, the willingness part. But the point is when you're feeling hurt, that's your tip off that like something's needing attention. So that's the first primary feeling. The second one is loneliness. And the gift of loneliness is connection. So as human beings, we are fully designed to live in connection with one another. Neuroscience and everything that is being discovered in research today is all really backing this up, to where how humans, their mental health and our ability to survive really hinges on our being connected as a social, in a social construct as human beings. And the feeling, if you will, that's driving us to that connection is the feeling of loneliness. So if you have shut down the feeling of loneliness, if you refuse to feel the feeling of loneliness, and again, I'll expound on what I mean by that later, um, you will not be connected with other people, because this is the feeling that leads us to that connection, if that makes sense. And that's the connection is the gift of this feeling. And right off, you're going to see, you might notice already, we're talking hurt and loneliness. These are two feelings that typically, like, we don't, nobody's excited to wake up in the morning and feel these things, right? Um, these are feelings that we generally try to get rid of. And again, that goes back to our previous slide. I'm going to bring this up because I'm going to circle back to this probably more than once. Um, you know, that we've approached our life, from early on, making these feelings go away. They're irrelevant. They're dangerous. They torture me. Um, and so, we're going to feel some of that as we go through here. Um, and notice this list as it keeps coming down, but yet look at this other side. Look at the gifts that they bring us: repair and connection. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I'm all about repairing hurt in my relationships, and I'm absolutely, I love connection. Um, so I'm immediately presented with this kind of dilemma where it's like, okay, if I want these things, then I got to do these things. And that's not terribly intuitive right off. I'm hoping it will make a lot more sense by the time we get further down this tonight. So the next one is sad. And the gift of sadness is honoring what has been lost. And, if you guys think about this from the perspective of maybe experiencing a deep tragedy, if you've ever lost somebody who's very close to you, a child, a spouse, maybe a grandparent, um, maybe you've gone through something like a terrible divorce, but in some capacity been blindsided. And you've heard other people talk about, if you haven't experienced yourself, you wake up in the morning and it's like people are just going about their day, like the world's just operating, and like nothing's slowed down. And there's just this cry in your body and your heart that says, can you guys just stop? Like, can somebody like make the earth literally stop revolving on its axis for a moment? And that cry is, hey, I am experiencing this incredible sadness, and it deserves to be honored by a pause and by a reflection on what has been lost here. One way that this became really obvious on almost a state, like a national scale, that we saw in 9/11, where uh, the entire city of New York, which is not known for its pausing and slowing down and contemplating, hard things. At 9/11, the city came to a screeching halt. And I remember hearing people talk about how strange it was, all of a sudden, traffic went from being a cutthroat, endeavor to people slowing down and allowing other people to merge onto the expressway. It's like the whole city just took its pace from 150 miles an hour down to 5. And that is an example of like the slowing down and the honoring of like something unbelievably tragic that's just happened. So our heart was designed to feel sadness for for receiving the gift ourselves, and as a community for feeling the honor and honoring that which has been lost. The next one is fear. And this one can be particularly confusing, especially as Christians. A lot of us, I think, in here probably are. And we hear that we're not to fear. There's specific Bible verses that say not to fear and that kind of thing. This can seem a little bit contradictory to even some of our understandings of Scripture and theology and that. I just want to say that if you can put those on pause for a minute, we will circle back to that a little bit more specifically later. But for now, think of fear this way, and the gift of safety. So It's very simple. If you're going to walk across 6 lanes of busy traffic because you got to get from one side of the street to the other, it's good to feel fear. There's a gift in feeling fear. Fear as you approach those 6 lanes of traffic is going to be what keeps you safe as you cross over. If you have no fear, literally, like it's, I mean, it'd be comical, like you can't even imagine it, but if you had zero fear, you would just start walking. And of course, you would, you might make it across a lane or two at best. And after that, you're going to be in big trouble. So the gift of fear is safety. And this one, we'll spend a little bit more time probably than on some of the others, but the gift or the feeling of shame is also one of the primary feelings. And the gift of shame, this one probably isn't as intuitive as some of these other ones. The gift of shame is humility. And I want to be clear about this. I don't mean the gift of shame is humiliation. That's different. Um, but if you really truly have a healthy relationship with shame, and we're going to talk, like I said, we're going to kind of harp on shame a little bit more throughout this, and what a healthy relationship looks like with um, the primary feeling of shame. And I want to differentiate this from toxic shame, which we'll talk about. Toxic shame is not one of the primary feelings. Toxic shame is actually a refusal to feel shame or an inability to feel shame. So if you have a healthy relationship with shame, the gift for you will be humility. And I don't know about you guys. For me, humility is a trait that I deeply desire. I find deeply attractive in other people and other men. And when I see a humble man, meet a humble man, I very much want to emulate, his humility. And I think humility is one of the biggest gifts that any of us can give or receive inside of a relationship. Guilt is the seventh, one, two, three, four, five, sixth feeling. And the gift, if you are willing and able to have a healthy relationship and be able to feel guilt, is restoration. So somebody who does not feel guilt, again, you can do the math really quick. They're gonna not find a lot of restoration in their relationships for very obvious reasons. Okay. Nobody wants to be harmed and hurt by somebody, and for them to feel absolutely no guilt about it, it's like, okay, screw you, man. Like, I'm not gonna stick around for this, and so there's with guilt, obviously, there's a harm that's been done. And if you're unwilling to feel it or unable to feel it because of the toxic shame you feel around it, you're going to be less likely to be able to restore that relationship properly. And probably many of you have experienced something exactly like this in your marriages, if you are married, where we hurt our spouse, and then we get the feedback that we don't seem to think we're very sorry for it. And we can even identify with that, where we feel incredibly defensive and we might get angry when our, quote unquote, sin has been brought up by our spouse. And from that place, it's very difficult to find restoration. So that's the number 6 feeling. And number 7, anger. Now, I want to differentiate this. Tell you what, give me just a second here. I actually need to, whoops, we're not going to do that. Let's bring that back down. Okay. Okay, picking back up. Sorry about that. Anger. This is not rage in this particular model, in this particular sense. The feeling of anger is, in this context, the feeling of like want or desire. It's being in touch with something that you are passionate about. The gift of it is passion. So if your anger has been suppressed, if you're suppressing this feeling in your life, then you will not have the gift of being in touch with your passion and all the things that then would derive from having that passion. So you find, we'll go into what happens when you suppress that later. But just know for right now that the gift of anger, again, not rage, not being pissed off, but that being in touch with your passion is the gift of passion. And that's what it feels like, that's the feeling inside of your chest, if you will. The last one here, if I can get back to it, is glad. We finally got a pleasant one on here. Hurt, loneliness, sad, fear, shame, guilt, anger, and then glad. Now, you might think that feeling glad is easy, but the more self-aware of us are probably willing to admit that feeling glad sometimes is actually kind of difficult. And we see this at times where like we should feel glad. Maybe everyone's celebrating a big event. Maybe even people are celebrating us. And it's like, man, I think my wife or I think my friend is more excited for me than I am. And it's actually a suppression of this feeling because we are so used to suppressing all of our feelings. And so when gladness comes along, it's sometimes can be just as difficult to actually truly accept and receive in an embodied way. But if you can, then the gift of that is joy. And I want to differentiate joy right off the bat here from happiness. We'll use happiness, we'll use the word happy in a somewhat more cynical way throughout the rest of this. But just know that for this particular um, instance where we're differentiating between joy, which can actually be experienced along with all of these other feelings. So despite the fact that you're feeling shame, despite the fact that you're feeling fear and that you're sad, that you've got loneliness, that you're dealing with some hurt, you can have joy, the gift of joy in all of these feelings because you're able to feel glad the same way that you're able to feel all of these feelings. All right. So my question for you guys is who's ready to sign up for some hurt and some loneliness and some sad and some fear and some shame, guilt, anger? Like this list doesn't sound great, right? Um, it, yeah, you look at it and just kind of like, ugh, and maybe you guys even quickly identify with like a lot of these feelings again are things that you've tried either in your addictions and pursuits of dopamine to put away um, and to minimize in any way you can, or you've been again going back to that previous slide where you've been taught that these things were to be avoided. Um, it you'd have to be a little bit crazy to just look at this list and get excited about it. But check this one out. This is the second side of that with the gifts. Repair, connection, honoring what's been lost, safety, humility, restoration, passion, joy. Who wants to sign up for this list? I mean, absolutely. I'd sign up for this any day. So my question, and what I want you guys to think about is look at this list, stare at it for a minute, repair, connection, honoring, safety, humility, restoration. If you have been trained, well, let me back up. If these are the gifts of this list, but you've been trained, and even in your own intuitions and your own experiences, that this list is, evil, let's just say, undesirable. Do you see the problem that's going to happen as you avoid, if these are truly the path to these, and you've been avoiding these at all costs, whether that's with your addiction, whether that's with, spiritualizing and your theology and whatnot. But the point is, these are bad. Do you see how it's logical that you'd be missing out on these? Now, the confusing part here is going back to this list and saying, man, I've been feeling these my whole life. Like, this is why I came, these are the feelings that drove me into recovery. Like, you can't tell me I haven't been feeling these things. So I've been feeling them, but I'm not getting this. Like this list doesn't characterize my life, or I wouldn't be doing therapy. And I want to affirm your intuition about that. And I want to affirm your ability to sort of push back and tell the truth about that. But my point, at least for this moment, is can you understand that if these truly are the gifts of this other list, then doesn't it make sense that if you're avoiding this list, you will miss out on this list? So that's just a little bit of a setup for the rest of this. And I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit. So I'll just go through this slide real quick. Are you sure feelings lead to these? Not in my experience. And so the next obvious question, the most logical next question might be, so what am I doing wrong? I've been feeling those feelings. I'm not getting these gifts. So what am I doing wrong? And we're kind of going around in circles here a little bit, but I really want to drive this home. Absolutely nothing. You haven't been doing anything wrong. You have been doing exactly what you've been taught. These feelings don't matter. They're dangerous. Stay away from them. They're uncomfortable. So if this has been the game plan throughout our life, then congrats. You've been doing it. You've been succeeding at the game plan that was given you, at the strategies for feelings that were handed to you, and that maybe in your own childish ways intuitively seemed right to avoid. Because let's be honest, feeling those feelings, again, you'd have to be a little bit off your rocker to wake up in the morning and just think, man, I'm ready to do some hurt and some loneliness today, right? Like nobody does that. Something that might be kind of helpful around that, if you think about it, is, you know, uh, maybe as a child and as a teenager, you don't have to worry about it as much. But, as we're all getting older, um, our bodies start to wear down and fall apart and expand in ways that we wish they wouldn't. And it's not intuitive to go into a room that is specifically designed for strenuous activity to, hurt your body by picking up heavy things and damaging your muscles. Like literally, that's what weightlifting is damaging your body. So you go in and you damage your body so that it is built up stronger in the future, right? That's the whole point of being physically fit, working out, running, hate running. Like nothing about any of that stuff is natural to us right out of the gate. I mean, some people are gym rats, and you know, uh, they've just always really enjoyed that. And hey, some people are really healthy emotionally right out of the gate, and they handle these feelings well. But a lot of us have been, really discouraged, let's say, from having any sort of a healthy exercise routine on the emotional plane, if you will. So it's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's that you've literally been succeeding at suppressing these feelings. Um, and again, I understand why that might still be confusing because you're like, man, my life is characterized by sadness and loneliness. So we're getting to that pretty much right now. So I've got the 8 feelings here crossed out, and we've got the 8 impairments. So an impairment is a maladaptive emotional response to feelings. And I want to like really just take a second here and make sure that we're understanding what we're about to talk about are impairments. They are not feelings. They are the things we've been calling feelings. And this is where um, you'll find some of these answers to some of the dilemmas I've been describing, where you're like, hey, I'm feeling these feelings. I'm not getting the gifts. What are you talking about, Jason? Okay, this is it right here. We've actually been living in, via our pursuits and teachings of our parents and pastors and own childish intuitions, we've been living in the impairments of feelings, and we've been calling them feelings. But they're not feelings. They're actually a refusal to live in feeling. So we'll go down here real quick and we're going to go back through the 8 feelings, but this time with their impairment instead of with their gift. So the feeling of hurt, that was the one we started with before. We're starting with it again. The impairment of hurt is living in resentment. Now, if you remember, the gift of hurt was repair, right? Let me ask you, does resentment, how often does that lead you into repairs of your relationships? If you're resenting your wife, if she's resenting you, your friend, um, nobody has ever uh, started with resentment and just wound up with like wonderful repair in their relationship. Um, so this, but yet we will often be feeling, let me back up because it's not a feeling. We will often be experiencing resentment. But with our words, we're saying, I feel hurt. And you might not even say that in the moment with the person because it actually takes quite a bit of vulnerability to say, hey, you've hurt me. Um, if you're really in resentment, you're usually what? Your jaw is set, your muscles are flexed. Maybe you're taking 10 minutes extra in the shower because you're having these conversations in your head and you're beating them in an argument and you're putting them in their place, inside your head. This is resentment. And while the feeling like way buried underneath might actually be hurt, you're not feeling hurt. You're experiencing resentment and you're calling it hurt. But that's why you're not getting the gift of repair, because resentment does not breed repair, if that makes sense. Um, so one of the fun things about my environment that I was not expecting tonight is that somebody is outside the door vacuuming now. And I hope you guys can't hear it. I hope it's not too annoying if you can. But we're gonna just push through and hopefully that is not too bad. I'm gonna take a drink here real quick. All right. Okay, so hopefully this will make sense. We'll keep going through each feeling here one at a time. I see some chats popping up. I'm just gonna click on this real quick and see what you guys are saying. Well, it's not allowing me to while I do my screen share, so that's fun. Okay, hopefully we're good. Going blind here. Loneliness. So the impaired state of loneliness. Again, apathy, not a feeling. It is the maladaptive response to the feeling of loneliness. So you might call a friend and say, I'm feeling lonely with so-and-so. It's not usually terminology that we use right off, but as you begin to learn these feelings and utilize these feelings, you might find yourself saying something like that more often. So it's like, man, I've texted my buddy, for the last 3 days in a row and he hasn't responded. I'm feeling lonely. Or maybe on a grander, bigger life scale. Maybe you are having trouble even having any friends at all. And you'll notice that as the pain of that, as the unmet need of loneliness really, begins to jade you, if you will, and your willingness to continue feeling it decreases to where you start having a need to just squash this feeling because it's too much. You'll notice that you'll find yourself in an impaired state of apathy. And you guys, we've probably all experienced this at some point or another where we've reached out for help. We've reached out to a friend. There wasn't any response. Maybe we reached out to a spouse and maybe she was in her resentment and unavailable. And you know what? I don't even care anymore. I'm just gonna fill in the blank. Um, and it's different even from the resentment. And this can get a little confusing because loneliness hurts, right? So some of these feelings can be kind of related to each other. And again, as you begin looking at impairments versus feelings, this is how it helps you get really super precise. Because sometimes we might naturally say, so and so hurt me. When if you really dissect it down, they haven't done anything to hurt you. What's happened is you're feeling loneliness with that person because maybe they've been unresponsive or whatever. And they haven't actually hurt you. You're just loneliness with them, which hurts. And in order to have the need properly met, it can be confusing for you to go to that person telling them that they've hurt you. when they haven't hurt you, and then you end up in an argument about whether or not you've been hurt, when the more accurate, precise, helpful language would be, hey, I'm feeling loneliness right now, and here's why. And I'm wondering, remember the gift of loneliness, if we can connect over this or over maybe whatever the original thing is you're wanting to connect over, if that makes sense. But if you're unwilling to or unable to maturely handle loneliness and actually see it for what it really is, you'll find yourself by default in a childlike way going to apathy, especially if you're very practiced at not feeling feelings. You'll go to apathy because apathy gives you a sense of control of some sort. You're at least controlling the feeling, because once you're apathetic, you don't care. And you can just kind of go numb, and you can screw everybody. Well, screw everybody might be more towards the resentment category. But the point is you're not feeling the pain of that loneliness anymore. All right. Sad. So sadness is another one that is, again, difficult to feel. And I want to compare this with self-pity. So if you guys have ever, you probably all experienced, maybe, there's a lot of HM guys, I think almost everybody in here, there might be a few that aren't in HM, but you've experienced let's say a social media post, and it's somebody who's telling a story, a testimony, whatever, about something tragic that's happened in their life. Or maybe they're talking about their recovery story, and it's just a sad, sad story. And by the end of it, you find yourself feeling so connected to that person. And you find yourself wanting, again, the gift of sadness is honoring what's been lost. You find yourself wanting to just jump in with that guy and just honor like what he's been through, what he's lost, whatever the thing is in his story. That is a man who has expressed his sadness well, and the two of you, your hearts connected over the sadness. Because that's the thing, at the end of the day, all of this is designed, these feelings are designed for our hearts to connect with one another. And when we're in our feelings, our hearts do connect. That's why hurt leads to repair. That's why loneliness leads to connection. That's why sadness leads to a combined honoring between two parties. Because that's the way our hearts are designed to connect through the feelings. But when you're in the impairments, our hearts are not designed to connect that way. And you've probably experienced this through the exact same type of social media post where a guy is expressing his sadness. But the more that he talks and the more that you read, the more you get like a ugh feeling. The more you get a feeling of like, okay, can this be over? Like, I'm gonna click on to the next one. It might be all kinds of ways. It might be like a whininess. It might be, a very woe is me. Um, and you might even feel a little bit guilty for not feeling empathetic towards the guy, but that's what you're feeling. Like, and so, and it doesn't create a connection with the guy. And you don't feel like, oh my God, I want to DM this guy and tell him, how much his story meant to me. You're actually feeling like, can I get out of here? Like, can we move on to the next one? This is a guy who's trying to express his sadness, but he's actually unable to. He's unable to actually feel it and enter into it in his heart. And what he's doing is he's wallowing in a self-pity. And in that impaired state, your heart's not able to connect to him. And so even if you don't know what's going on between those two guys, because it's never been taught to you or just whatever, so you're thinking about it for the first time. This is why one person's sad post can just really wrench your heart. And the next person's sad post can just make you flick like, right by it and go on to the next one without even commenting. It's the difference between a man who's in his sadness versus a man who's in his self-pity. All right, fear. Now, this is where we get back a little bit to the kind of the biblical confusion, if you will. So I'm not going to go into exegesis mode because that's not what we're here for. But this will give you a little bit of an idea more of, I think, what Scripture is describing maybe in our modern English language that isn't necessarily nuanced or captured in the original uh, texts, if you will. But anxiety is the impaired state of fear. So fear, remember the gift of it was safety. Fear is a God-given feeling for you to inventory legitimate threats. Say, I'm scared. Okay, I'm about to walk across the street. There's legitimate threats coming both directions, right? We need to be scared. We need to be afraid of legitimate threats so that we can avoid the legitimate threats. But imagine the same guy standing on the side of the sidewalk, and he's in anxiety, and he's formed. I mean, it might be a little bit of a caricature of a person for as far as crossing streets go. Um, but imagine for a moment that a person has anxiety about crossing streets. Is that person's anxiety um, adding to his life? Is it really keeping him safe? Well, I mean, it might be keeping him physically safe, but it's eroding, his emotional capacity and his heart and his mental health as he literally, forget the 6 lanes of traffic. He has a hard time crossing a two-way street in a neighborhood. And you can imagine like this is not a gift to this person. This is actually a curse to the person. And so, in this sense, the inability to have a healthy relationship with the feeling of fear and say, okay, I need to scan the horizon here. I need to identify threats and I need to come up with solutions that minimize those threats. That's a healthy relationship with fear. That is not unbiblical at all. Um, that anyway, you get the picture of the difference between that and anxiety. Um, and you can see how anxiety you might be feeling anxiety and calling it fear, and then you're confused why you're not getting the gift of feeling safe and actually having safety, because you don't have a healthy relationship with fear and a history of being willing to feel the fear and a capacity to receive the gift of it. Shame is so the impairment of shame is toxic shame. This is the one that most of us are intimately familiar with, toxic shame. And we call it shame, but it is a very, very toxic form of shame. And so uh, let's see here. I wanted to give a definition of shame, but well, I'll leave that. I'll leave that for a little bit later. Just know right now that the impairment of shame is toxic shame. And again, that's what will rob you from the gift of shame. When you think you're feeling it, but you're actually not. Guilt actually has the same exact impairment. I don't know why that is. I didn't write it. I would have loved to have had a different one just for, the sake of a good PowerPoint and one not having the same impairment as the other. But anyway, guilt, the impairment of guilt is toxic shame. And you can, easily probably identify with this in your life where you've done something wrong. And instead of properly feeling guilt and receiving the gift of, reparations made, you go into your toxic shame. And maybe your wife, your friend, relative, um, they've come to you with a hurt. And instead of you feeling and having a healthy relationship with guilt, where you say, oh my God, I am so sorry. I did do that. And that was completely selfish of me. It's completely wrong. Whatever the thing is that they're bringing to you. What can I do? What can I do to make this? What can I do to repair this with us? What can I do to start restoring trust around this and to help you understand and know that I care and what happened mattered and I'm not going to do it anymore? How many of us would love to show up to our relationships that way? And yet, when the time comes, we're just buried in toxic shame. We can't even look at the person, let alone make a heartfelt apology. It's your head's down, you can't make eye contact. Maybe even they start in their own coping way begin to tell you, hey, well, it's not that bad, man. And it's all of a sudden they're reacting to your toxic shame. And instead of there being repairs made and there being a beautiful reunion in relationship. Now you've got like the person that you've harmed is now having to take care of you because you're in your toxic shame. And so they're actually getting doubly harmed in that, and it becomes a mess. Probably one that we're mostly all familiar with. Anger. So the impaired state of anger is depression or demand. And so again, remember, anger was not rage, not pissed offness. It's like being in touch with your passion, being in touch with what matters to you, what you want in life and relationship, whatever in a situation. And it's pain. Anger is a painful feeling in and of itself because if you really want something, even for perfectly noble reasons, um, it hurts. It's painful when you're not getting it. And so to stay in touch with what you want when you're not getting it is difficult. It takes emotional maturity. And it's easier, again, when you have the agenda, to not feel that thing, to not feel all these things. It's easier to get depressed and just shut your own passion and your own desire down, because that's less painful than actually continuing to feel it. Or you go to demand, and that's like, oh, I'm getting what I want. I know what I want. I know what I'm feeling. I know what matters to me, and to hell with anybody who's standing in the way. Um, and in that sense, you think you're feeling passionate about what you want and what you need, when the truth is you're actually demanding things from other people in a very unrelational way. And there again, robbing yourself of the gift of anger. Let's see. And then the last one, glad. So this is where we get back to the word happy. And I said, again, I told you we'd use this word a little bit cynically. Happy is it's a very it's a counterfeit of joy. And so you might think you're feeling joy during a dopamine dump, but we're all very familiar with joy suddenly disappearing shortly, after the dopamine is gone. And so what's actually happening that's that situation is you're not receiving the gift of joy at all. You're just happy for the moment. And as soon as whatever external circumstance is no longer the external circumstance, then your happiness is gone just like that. And so again, that's the difference between being able to feel the real feeling, which is gladness leading to joy, versus somebody who's just constantly pursuing happiness. Oh, I think I duplicated that slide there. Okay, so I put all of this on a three-way, nice little itemized chart for you guys. We've got the feelings down the center here. Remember, these are what we've been fighting against. These are what we've been avoiding, either in our addiction or just practically in our life. And these are the feelings that go here if you're willing to stay in them and if you're not. Most of us, where we think we've been existing, or where we've actually been existing, is over here in the impairments column. And I want to take a moment and just go through this left side here for a second. And if you guys would, just close your eyes. I'm just going to list off these words, and I just want you to imagine how adequately and thoroughly these ones really have characterized your life, your relationships. Some of them maybe more than others. We're a lot of different guys here with a lot of different stories and a lot of different wounds. So some of these might jump out more than others, but I just want to go down through them and just feel them in our body, comparing to that feeling that we had at the beginning of this, where we were talking about home, where we were talking about belonging and mattering, um, no matter what, and being in that place internally. Uh, that's described by the far right column here with repair, connection, honored losses, safety, humility, restoration, passion, joy. Let's go down this left list and just take a moment and pause at each word. Resentment. Just think about how resentment, how do you feel when you're in resentment, when you're resenting somebody, maybe a friend, maybe a spouse, maybe God, maybe the universe, but you feel that resentment inside. Maybe the word hatred comes up. Just think about apathy, how you feel, what happens to your body, what happens to its posture when you hit apathy. You just feel yourself deflating, you feel yourself going maybe inward, downward, getting smaller, trying to essentially be non-existent, not feel anything. Just feel the toxicity of that place and the darkness of that place of apathy when you're there, particularly as it's attached to the loneliness, when you're just feeling really alone and you're just wanting to give up and quit. Think about self-pity and just the difficulty, the misery of being in that place of self-pity. And if you have the ability to admit that you're there when you're there, and it's like nobody can say anything to you that's comforting at all. Not because you're genuinely just in a place of appropriate grieving, but because it's just woe is me. And and you're just stuck in that downward awful cycle of how sucky your life is. Um, yeah, think of anxiety. It's what it's like to just constantly feel that from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. Maybe it's around particularly people where you really feel your anxiety amping up. Maybe certain places, maybe at work. But it just feels like this overwhelming experience of like like there's always a shoe that's about to drop. Something bad is always just about to happen. Toxic shame. Do I even need to describe this one? Shame over what we're capable of, what we're incapable of, typically. Maybe what you've been told you're incapable of by a spouse or friend. And you feel that, you recognize there's truth in it, and you just feel like shit about it. Again, toxic shame when you've done something wrong and you want to feel sorry, you want to make amends, but you just feel so awful that you literally can't even say I'm sorry and make amends, at least in a meaningful way to the other person, because you're stuck in toxic shame and they can feel it. Their heart knows that you're not reaching for restoration. Their heart knows that they're still alone, even in your confession, even in your asking for forgiveness, because it's not about doing it right. It's not about saying the right words and asking for forgiveness. It's about where you're actually at and your ability to actually feel guilt and have a healthy relationship with it. And it's not where you're at. So their heart's not fooled. They can feel that you're in some kind of an impaired, not present state. Depression and demand. Oh, just think about, when you really want something and you're not getting it, you start feeling that rage where you're gonna take it. These are very heavy list of feelings: resentment, apathy, self-pity, anxiety, toxic shame, depression. If these characterize your existence, and I don't know about you guys, but these really did characterize most of my existence coming into recovery, and even through a lot of recovery. Because after learning this list, it doesn't disappear. This is these are patterns built into our nervous system by the time we're at our ages now. And it's a hard list to live with on a every single day basis. Now, I haven't mentioned the last one yet. And if you guys would go ahead and if your eyes are still closed, go ahead and open them. And look at this box that I have down at the bottom. Whoops, I just lost light in the room. Motion sensors. We're back on. I want to look at this last box. This is in the impairment category. Now, if you have been living in the impairments because you've been successfully avoiding your feelings, just like you've been taught and like you've intuited. So let's just take for granted that we've been living in the impairments. Every one of these impairments is really quite dreadful uh, when you realize how much you're experiencing it, whether it's in the moment or over a long period of time. But look at happy. If I'm going to live in this list of impairments every day, and because this is the list that I've grown the capacity to live in, which one am I going to choose? Because this is where I am. And I don't know about you guys, but I am absolutely every chance I can get gonna gonna aim for happy because on this entire chart, it's the only one that I can get to. It's in the impairment column, so I qualify for that column, and it's the only one I can get to that isn't directly painful. And so this box right here is where our addiction is on this chart. And if you think about that, this box circled in red called happy is actually the saddest box on this entire chart, as characterized by many of our stories in addiction and the wreckage that our addictions cause. As we experience the pain of this column minus this one box that we can dump ourselves into manually by manipulating our nervous systems and the dopamine that we can experience the impaired state of gladness in if but for a moment or for several hours or 8 hours on a binge through the night. Somebody just mentioned that there's some questions coming in, and I do want to say that we are going to get to a Q&A here very shortly. So I'm sorry, I'm inexperienced at doing these, clearly, if you haven't gathered that by now. And I'm not able to see the chat box while I'm sharing my screen. So I'm just going to kind of push through here and then we'll tackle all the questions that you guys really want to tackle and have time for. So here's the question, right? We're in this impairments column. How do we get over to the feelings? And by the way, I want to say real quickly here, because I meant to say this earlier. I'm speaking in very all or nothing, terminology throughout this, very black and white. Of course, we've all experienced the feelings. It's not like we live 100% of our life in impairments. We've never experienced a feeling before. The language I'm using is kind of extreme that way, just for helping make the points tonight. But we're human, and we all live on these spectrums, and some of these spectrums, they may bridge across more naturally for some than others, even within the different feelings. So I just wanted to give that some nuance, and just say it, lest we fall into despair, that, we're just nothing but an impairment machine. We're all fully capable of feeling these feelings. But how do we get there? If I'm in resentment, and let's say now that we have some nuancy awareness because of what we're learning here tonight, you might say, okay, and this is part of the value of knowing the impairments so well, is because you can identify where you are, and then it's helpful to understand where you're wanting to go. So if I know I'm seething in resentment, and I'm just pissed at somebody, I know I can then say, okay, well, I've been hurt. Um, and so there's a hurt that I'm trying to control with my resentment. Instead of feeling hurt, I'm wanting to feel powerful. I'm wanting to feel threatening to somebody. Because that's more comfortable. But if I feel this way, if I stay in this resentment, I'm not going to get the repair that I want. And so this is literally the conversations I have in my head. Um, and as I try to coach myself into the other column over here, especially in a real-time moment when maybe you're on a phone with a friend or laying in bed with your spouse at night having a conversation. It's like, um, I know that I'm in hurt, but or I know that there's a feeling of hurt underneath this, but I'm stuck in my resentment. So how do we get over there? How do we change our nervous systems from being in one place to another, right? And this is where I think that a healthy relationship with shame really is the key to unlocking ourselves from one column to the other. And I'll explain a little bit about why that is. Actually, I'm going to go to the next slide real quick and we'll come back to this one. So let's talk about healthy shame. Healthy shame and a healthy relationship with shame, you might say, is the quiet wisdom that I am human. And with that comes natural limitations. Emotional, physical, spiritual, relational. In those limitations, I am capable of causing harm to myself and others. But when I accept my humanness, I accept those limitations, if you will, and live within the design of being a feeling creature with limitations, I can move beyond my ego, my defenses, into honest connection with others who share the same fragile and beautiful condition. This is what a healthy relationship looks like. And I'd encourage you guys after this is over to really just meditate on this because there's just so much packed into this paragraph about what healthy shame is and looks like. So the quick summary short version is you're accepting the fact that you have limitations and that you're in existence with other people with limitations. And that's important because this isn't just about you. This is about them doing things and relating in ways that cause feelings inside of you that you can either go to resentment about, or you can start trying to control and demand. But when you acknowledge that, man, this person has limitations too. Like they have stories, they have wounds, they have constraints on their schedule. Um, they're in a place spiritually that they may not be able to meet some of the needs that I have, or relationally that they may not be able to meet some of these needs. And so when you've accepted your own limitations and the fact that you're a human being and you can only do so much, you start allowing other people to be in that same fragile, beautiful condition. And all of a sudden, with that healthy relationship with shame, you can find yourself at least backing off the gas pedal on your resentment and finding yourself willing, um, you know, being in touch with your anger and saying, boy, I want this relationship and I want other relationships. And so um, there's a space that's created in healthy shame for you to be imperfect, which allows you to tell the truth about your guilt, which allows you to receive feedback and feel the shame as somebody tells you about what it's like to live with you and your limitations. Because that healthy shame says, yeah, you're right. Like I am limited. Um, and I'm so sorry that my limit, like that you're living with my limitations today. And so I'm going to speed up a little bit here because we're going on in time, but you can see how taking this feeling of shame and applying it to every single one of these columns over here. Again, it just opens up space. And maybe even before actually opening up space, at the very least, if nothing else, you can you can begin to tell the truth about what's actually going on. And so in my case, what this might look like real time is I've been hurt by my wife in something, and we're laying in bed, and we're trying to go to sleep, but we're having this conversation, and she's hurt me, I've hurt her, but my body is actually in a place of resentment. And like I'm just pissed at her. And she's wanting to have a conversation. Now, in the past, without any consciousness of all this going on, I'm just spewing resentment. And I might be trying to make it sound good. I might be trying to dress it up as best I can, but she's getting the resentment underneath all of it. And in that, we're not experiencing the gift of any hurt. Well, now, even though I can't just look at the chart and say, well, I'm feeling hurt. When my body is in resentment, when I'm in that place, the very least what I can do immediately is start telling the truth about it. And I've done this with her, and I've said, babe, like honestly, like I'm just pissed right now, and we really shouldn't have this conversation because I want to hear what you're going through, and I want to address this in a helpful way, and I want us to be connected. But I'm telling you right now, the truth about where I am is that I can't do it. I can't do it tonight. So maybe tomorrow night, or maybe if we need a few days, if it's something real big. Um, but at least I can tell the truth about it now, because in my shame, I don't have to be Superman. I don't have to be God. I don't have to be performing perfectly in this feelings chart over here. Because like the perfectionists and the performers in us will stare at this feelings chart and go, oh, I'm gonna be there. And we'll tell our spouse that that's where we are. When the truth is we're over here in the impairments. And if nothing else, starting immediately today, tonight, you can start owning that you're over here in the impairments. And that takes the responsibility off of your spouse to deal with that and to get you out of there, because now you're owning your place over there, if that makes sense. So that's why shame and understanding your limitations is so helpful for all of these. Okay, we're right at the end here, guys. We'll get into some Q&A here. Let's practice some healthy shame before we leave about what we've learned tonight. And I sort of blended this with some of what I was just saying, so we don't need to spend a ton of time on this. But healthy shame as you leave tonight, and you have now a much greater awareness of what a feeling is versus what an impairment is. And this gets into what I was just talking about, the performers in us, and our in our toxic shame, which is the performer parts. We will think that we're capable of going from an entire lifetime living in this column, living, let's say, predominantly in this column. And it's like we went to a webinar, and all of a sudden we know there's two columns. And so all of a sudden we put this expectation on ourselves that we're just going to exist suddenly in this right side column in the feelings. And a healthy shame, a healthy relationship with shame tonight says that's not going to be possible. That's not going to be possible. Our whole nervous system is built in this other area, and we've been succeeding like hell at it. Okay. So it's going to take some time. I mean, I learned about this 10 years ago, and I feel like I'm just like still scratching the surface of it. I don't say that to discourage anybody, but like this stuff's really hard. It's really, really, really hard because this left impairment column is so ingrained in our systems. So a healthy shame, instead of pretending that we can just leap over to this other super healthy column and just be willing to feel our feelings, healthy shame says we might have to start by just telling the truth about this left-hand side, about this impairment column. And it not to create a bond with the brokenness of that side and to reinforce that, but just to tell the truth about like this is where I am, and this actually makes a lot of sense about why our conversations with our wives aren't going well, or whatever, why I'm not receiving the gifts of these feelings in my life and in my relationships, and just recognizing that our brains um, compute much faster than our hearts actually are able to change and heal, and the rest of our nervous system and our body actually cooperates with what we just learned cognitively. And that's something that I see a lot of guys early on in recovery struggling with, is they're just learning so fast, all this stuff, and like their body's not catching up. And that frustrates the living hell out of them. And it sends them deeper into toxic shame a lot of times. And, maybe I'm just too broken and all this stuff. The reality is, you're a human being who's built a certain way with a certain nervous system. You've been grinding that nervous system into its form for 3, 4, 5 decades. Have some healthy shame about where you're at, about how hard it is to change these things, and start telling the truth about it. Just start telling the truth about that. And as you tell the truth about that, um, trust God and trust the process. If maybe trusting God is triggering for you, trust the process that just telling the truth about it alone begins to depressurize this. And that's the experience that I've had with this, because I've tried to perform the living hell out of this feelings column, and I can tell you guys it leads to exhaustion. That's the truth at the end of the day. Um, that's where the proof comes out in the pudding, is you think you're nailing it, and 6 months, a year, 2 years goes by, and you're just flipping exhausted. And the reality is you've been performing, and sort of kidding yourself that you're in the feelings, when the truth is you're over in the impairments, and it's an exhausting, tiring way to live. And it's not how you were designed to live. So it's why you're exhausted and tired. You're designed to live in the feelings, even though they're painful. Um, they actually will lead you into the gift column. All right, I'll stop beating that dead horse. So that kind of ends my presentation part. May you guys learn to live in these 8 primary feelings, and may they guide you to that place of home. Um, I I want to just affirm every single one of you for being willing to learn about these things and to be patient with yourselves. I want to encourage you to be patient with yourselves and to begin to really focus and study, stare at that description of healthy shame and allow it to depressurize um, your system from having to perform all of this so correctly, and allow people to accept you where you're at, and to begin accepting other people where they're at in their same, similar, beautiful, broken condition, if you will. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. All right. Well, thanks for sticking with us there through that. I know it was a little bit of a marathon, but there's a lot of material there to cover, as you saw. And I hope it was helpful. I hope it was meaningful. If so, I'd love to hear about your experience of it in the comments, or if you have any questions, feel free to post those there too, and I'll try to respond. If you would be at all interested in doing deeper work around this on a one-on-one level, you can sign up for a free 30-minute consultation at my website, jasonpidcockcoaching.com, and we can get to know each other and just hear a little bit about the kind of work you're hoping to do. So whether I see you then or at the next webinar, I hope you're well.